Ready to look at some John Romita Jr. pencils? I am. We're going to do that in this video by looking through this Thor rough cut issue. Hey, what's up? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Thomas Patilli. I'm a comic book artist and an illustrator. In a recent video, we actually looked through this Captain America rough cut issue by Ron Garney. In that video, I explained what rough cut issues were. Really quick, essentially what they were was a penciled version of a comic that had recently come out. It was part of the Heroes Return series, and artists like Ron Garney and John Romita Jr. and Alan Davis were tackling some of Marvel's biggest characters, like Captain America, Fantastic Four, and in John Romita Jr.'s case, Thor. I actually didn't have this issue growing up, this particular rough cut issue. I had the actual Thor comic. I really loved this run on Thor that John Romita Jr. did. It was one of my favorite superhero comics at the time. But I didn't know that there was a rough cut edition to this comic. Not until I made that recent Ron Garney rough cut video did I find out that this thing even existed, and that's thanks to a lot of you who were mentioning other rough cut issues in the comments of that video. Apparently Alan Davis has one as well for Fantastic Four. Perhaps in a future video we'll look at that one too. But because of your very kind recommendations, I picked this up on eBay recently, and I was really happy to find out that this thing even existed. John Romita Jr. is one of those polarizing comic artists, sort of like a Rob Liefeld in some ways. I personally think he's one of the best superhero comic artists to have worked in the field, but I probably wouldn't have said that when I was like 10, 11 years old, because at that time I had a very, very specific criteria for what I thought a great comic artist was supposed to be. I was very much influenced and obsessed with the Image Comics look, overly rendered stuff, a lot of cross-hatching, a lot of flashy art. I still like that stuff and can really appreciate it even now as an adult. But as I got older, and especially as I started to try and tell visual stories myself and learn and understand more about the art of comic storytelling, an artist like John Romita Jr. really started to impress me. And I really started to understand the strength of an artist like him. John Romita Jr. is the son of John Romita Sr. John Romita Sr. is definitely one of my favorite comic book artists, and certainly, I believe, an influence on my own work. I've talked about John Romita Sr. in some of my other videos in the past. And as new and as much of a departure John Romita Jr.'s style might have been early on in the 80s and 90s, I think retrospectively, especially in this Thor run that he did, you can really see how influenced he really was by not only his father, but also his father's generation, guys like Jack Kirby and John Buscema. He really is in many ways a direct link between that old Silver Age classic Marvel style and modern day comics. In many ways, he is now one of the last of the greats. He's a traditional artist still, just drawing on paper with pencil. And he still abides by many of the fundamentals that made classic Marvel comics so amazing. And any chance I get to look at penciled art from a great comic book artist, I'll take it. And when I get to share it with you, that makes it all the more fun. So sit back, relax, and let's jump into this Thor rough cut penciled by John Romita Jr. Okay, the Mighty Thor, drawn by John Romita Jr. This one I didn't buy at the time. I scooped it up recently on eBay thanks to a lot of your suggestions in the comments of my Ron Garney video. And when I first opened it, I wasn't sure if this was like a bootleg version or something like that, because the quality, at least on the first page, seemed a little bit pixelated and perhaps like low quality. And that might have something to do with two things. It might be this issue was back in 1998, 97 or 98. It was 98. And so I would assume that whoever was documenting these pencils, whether it was just the editors at Marvel or John Romita Jr. himself, these were maybe pulled from like a fax machine or not the greatest scanner in terms of scanning actual pencils. The technology that we have and the methods that we have today are much better at preserving the nuances and subtleties of pencils. So I think that has something to do with it for sure. The other thing that I think might have to do with it, as we open into this really amazing double page spread, look at that, very cool, a vertical one, so I gotta flip the book. But I think the other thing that it might have to do with is that John Romita Jr.'s pencils are so sort of loose and kind of interpretive that he's using like the side of the pencil quite a bit. And it looks as though he's using, softer leads and things like that. He's not a noodler. He's not someone who is trying to get really, really tight pencils. He comes from the old school in a way where he's leaving his pencils up to the interpretation to some extent of the inker that he's working with, which is really a part of the process in many ways of collaborative comics. So trying to capture those kinds of pencils can be difficult, and that might also be one of the reasons why this looks a little bit more, like I said, rougher, pixelated, photocopy-ish, much more than the Ron Garney issue. And I think that's really cool. It just sort of speaks to the different approaches of different artists. Some artists have a heavier hand than other artists. Some artists use different softness or hardness of a pencil. And those are the things that really speak to each artist's individual style and their way of doing things, which is really cool. That's how you know it's a John Romita Jr. comic over a Ron Garney comic, for instance. But as loose and almost cartoony, and some would also say blocky, a style that John Romita Jr. has, man, is he just great at all the fundamentals. He's a really, really strong artist and storyteller. And I've mentioned this before with other artists' work, but it's little panels like this. You can call them a quick throwaway panel. It's these kinds of panels that I think in a lot of ways highlight the skill level of a particular artist, because all the basics are there in terms of perspective, drawing the figure, creating an atmosphere. And it's nothing super flashy or cool, but it really does the job and does it in a really great way. And when I look at these pencils by John Romita Jr., I could almost hear the pencil scratching on the paper. You can see a hand drawing this thing. It really, really feels like someone worked on this thing. And that energy really contributes to the final product in a lot of ways. I happen to think, and I'm not alone in this, that this particular run on Thor was John Romita Jr.'s, some of his best work, if not his best work. It felt like he was having a lot of fun. I don't know if he was, but it really, really felt like he was having a lot of fun. It also felt like he was in many ways channeling the artists of old. In a lot of ways, it's very Kirby, it's very Buscema. To put this particular issue in a time context, as we look at a really awesome and simple but effective establishing shot here of some sort of Navy base, very effectively done. This Heroes Return series, which is the same series that the Captain America comic was a part of, came after Heroes Reborn, which was another mid-90s event that brought on Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld back to Marvel and kind of like imageified all the Marvel characters. And so this Heroes Return event was a return to the classic characters with brand new number ones that definitely breathed new life into them. But in a lot of ways, I think it was supposed to be a throwback to that classic Silver Age energy that a lot of these classic characters had, like Captain America and Thor. I also really enjoyed the run that Alan Davis did on Fantastic Four as well. But I think John Romita Jr. was really channeling more than perhaps other comic work that he had done up until this point. I think he was really channeling those artists that came before him, like Jack Kirby and John Buscema, and of course, his own dad, John Romita Sr. I mean, look at this huge establishing shot right here. This has got Kirby written all over it with that architecture. Really awesome, imaginative stuff. He's also evoking all those like energy effects that Kirby would get, the Kirby crackle. And I followed this series when I was a kid, and I really, really enjoyed it. It felt like I was really understanding the magic of these classic characters like a Thor and Fantastic Four and Captain America. It was evoking that Silver Age feel and energy, but again, for a newer generation, which was me at this time. And although at the time I didn't have much of a knowledge of, again, someone like a Jack Kirby, somehow or another, I was picking up on this kind of classic, vintage, how to draw comics the Marvel way kind of feel in these pages, and I was really, really loving it. I mean, I'm going to try to zoom out here so you get the full effect of these two pages facing each other. I mean, this is just beautiful, beautiful stuff. You know, some might say that these are too loose or too messy of pencils, but man, I love stuff like this. It makes me want to draw. It also makes me want to ink. I would love to ink something like this, and perhaps this is a page that I could scan, print out, and ink on top of at some point, because there's just so much energy and chunkiness in the figure work that it's just really, really fun to look at, and really inspiring as an artist, because it makes you want to draw. I definitely understand that John Romita Jr. isn't for everybody. When I was a kid, and I was very, very much influenced and obsessed with the image guys, his stuff didn't really speak to me all that much, because in many ways it's really the antithesis of that stuff. It's not super, precise and noodly like the image stuff was, with all the cross hatching and the tight details. But it has such a strong understanding of storytelling and draftsmanship that the older I got, and certainly by the time this series came out, I really started to appreciate it. And certainly now, as a professional, I really appreciate it, and I love it even more. John Romita Jr. is someone who's still drawing comics, still drawing actual like monthly comic books, which is pretty amazing and really inspiring. He's worth a follow on social media. Once a week or so, his wife will take a video of him drawing at his drawing desk, and ask him what he's drawing. And for 30 to 60 seconds, he'll kind of just like talk about what he's drawing and what comic convention he's going to be at next. And there's something very old school and charming about it. And it's also really great to kind of pause the video and try to take a look at his drafting table, because it's cool to see all the things that might be on it in terms of like just printed out reference material. He seems like he's still a part of that old school, and it's one of the reasons why his work is so great. It looks as though he prints out his reference material and has it on his drafting table. He's not a smartphone guy, probably. So and he's of course still drawing with pencil on paper, and I've said it before, but there's quite a bit that you can do with that. As we look at some of these really great action sequences here, clarity is the name of the game with John Romita Jr. in many ways. He's a solid storyteller, and he knows how to keep the camera moving and keep the page turning, which is really that's the name of the game when it comes to exciting Marvel comics. He's really just illustrating all the things that How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way essentially teaches us. In many ways, I've said it before, but in many ways, How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way can be dated. As much as I love that book, I think there's certain details and intricacies that they don't get into because it's such a sort of general introduction to this stuff. But then when you see a pro like John Romita Jr. really utilize all that stuff that's in that book and put it to actual use, you realize just how effective the stuff in that book really is. And although perhaps it's very basic, I think drawing comics is primarily a really basic kind of thing. It doesn't make it easy, that's for sure. But there's a simplicity to it that can take a lifetime to try to achieve. But it's not necessarily complicated stuff. It's not rocket science. We're not curing any diseases. It's very simple, but it's not easy. And that's sort of the I'd say that's sort of the theme of John Romita Jr.'s work. Simple but not easy. I think to some people, they might look at it and criticize it for its simplicity and perhaps lack of rendering and all these fancy, tricks and things like that. But in many ways, it's much harder to do this stuff than it is to cover up a drawing with a bunch of cross-hatching or Photoshop lighting effects. So, I mean, you look at a spread like this, and that's just, man, that's classic superhero comics, just done right. And I think whether you like superhero comics or not, it's hard to not appreciate something like this. It's also, like I said before, it's hard not to, want to just like draw after you see this. That's some really, really powerful, awesome looking comics right there. Speaking of inking his work, I would imagine it's a challenge to ink this work because it's open to so much interpretation and because he's leaving you so much room in the pencils. I would imagine it's hard to capture a lot of this kind of simplistic energy that he's putting down. But John Romita Jr. has worked with some really, really great inkers over the years, including Klaus Janson and Al Williamson. I actually made a video years ago about the different inkers that have inked John Romita Jr. over the years. I'll link it somewhere here or down below. But each inker has left a very distinct mark on his work, and each collaboration that he's had with inkers is kind of its own version of his work. And I think that that's really, really cool. There's a lot of, kind of wisdom in that and lack of ego that I think only comes with a lot of experience, in that he's able to kind of give that much power and control to the inker, not trying to dictate with his pencils exactly how he wants everything to look. The classic Silver Age guys, they didn't do that. And I think that's what speaks to a lot of the magic and power in that older work. And he seems to kind of carry on that tradition in many ways. I could be wrong, but I almost feel like when he was drawing Thor, he was working on another comic, another monthly comic at the same time. Maybe I'm misremembering that, or maybe that was a different era or time period that he did that. But regardless, John Romita Jr. is not one to miss a deadline or spend too much time on a page. He's famous for working in deadline style, which is to say that the style is really a product of meeting your deadlines. And I think that there's a really respectable quality to that approach, and something that any commercial artist, whether you're a comic artist or an illustrator, shouldn't forget, that primarily you know, we are commercial artists and we work within certain parameters. One of those parameters is the deadline, you know, the date that the stuff is due by. And so, you know, you could fiddle around with it for years, or you can put the pencil down when you know it's time to turn it in. Otherwise, you won't get paid. And so there's a practicality to that kind of an approach. And I think a lot of that also shows through in John Romita Jr.'s work. Okay, so just like that Captain America Rough Stuff issue, the script or the plot is also in the back. And if you ever do pick this up or you have a copy of it yourself, one of the great things about these rough cut issues is being able to read what the writer wrote and how the artist then would interpret it. It looks as though Dan Gergens was writing this in Marvel style, Marvel method, similar to the way that Mark Waid was writing it for Ron Garney with the Captain America. And I've said this before, I've also made a video all about the Marvel method, but it's that very process that I think is one of the intangible strengths of a lot of those really great Silver Age comics, is the fact that these artists weren't working straight from a, you know, full out movie script, essentially. They were working off of a plot, sort of the writer describing what's going to be happening on the page with very little or no dialogue. And then the artist would draw the page, and then the writer would then react to what the artist put down in terms of narration and dialogue and all that. And so it's a very, very collaborative effort. And for a reader, it reads very differently than the very strict and stringent way of working from a full script. As we look at, I guess, John Romita Jr.'s sketch for the wraparound cover for this issue, which is really, really roughly done. And I would assume that this is just something that he put together so that he can get approval from the editors. And then here's a really awesome, iconic shot of Thor, very powerful, beautifully drawn. You could really see John Romita Jr. putting in the side of his pencil over here just to block in some of those lines. Again, this would be a very difficult thing to ink, and that's why whatever inker has inked over John Romita Jr. is definitely one that knows what they're doing, that's for sure. All right, I hope you enjoyed that video. It was a lot of fun looking through the amazing penciled work of John Romita Jr. If you were already a fan of John Romita Jr.'s work, perhaps like me, you weren't aware that this comic even existed, this penciled version. And if you're new to John Romita Jr., I hope you enjoyed this look at his work, and hopefully it's an introduction for you to fall down the rabbit hole of the decades of John Romita Jr. work that there is out there. Personally, I recommend his Daredevil miniseries, Man Without Fear, written by Frank Miller. I think that's some of his best work. And along with this Thor run, I also think that his work on Spider-Man in the early 2000s was incredible as well. And if you're not familiar with his work, those are 3 places to really start with. Are you a JR fan? Let me know in the comments. Also, let me know in the comments if you would like to see more penciled comic art type of videos. I know that Ron Garney penciled video resonated really well with all of you. It was really fun for me to look through that as well. So if you'd like to see more videos like this, looking through penciled comic art, let me know. Penciling is really an art in itself, and it's kind of a lost art in a lot of ways, just because nowadays so many pencilers really ink their own work, whether they're working digitally and even some that are still working traditionally. There's not as many distinctions anymore between a penciler and an inker. And there's all different philosophies on penciling. I happen to be more in, I guess, the camp of a loose penciler, but I'm always super impressed and really inspired by looking at some very, very tight, detailed penciled work. It always boggles my mind how an artist could get that much detail with just pencil. Different styles for different kinds of storytelling and different types of stories, but all of it's really cool to look at. So if you like this video and want to see more like it, please do hit that like button. If you would also like to see more videos in the future and not miss anything, consider subscribing to my channel. And if you would like to help this channel grow and you know someone who might like this video, please do share it with them as well. Everything helps in terms of getting the word out there about the channel. And I'm always super appreciative of all your guys' feedback and interest in my videos. So thank you. That's all I got for now. Thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.